Hello everyone, this is Eric Donato with Darkfire Airsoft. First of all, sorry if you guys can hear the rain because it is quite loud. So today I'm going to be doing a review on a whole bunch of different Type 96 pistons. So first of all, we got here the stock Type 96 piston, which is kind of obvious, it sucks. The next one is an SHS, or in this case PPS, basically the same thing, piston. Next one is Action Army Type 96 piston. The next one is the Modify Blue piston, which has the stainless steel tail. Although this is a Lilacs piston head. I don't know why I didn't get the Modify piston head, but I had this one, so I wanted to use it. And this last one is the Garter Type 96 piston and Garter Type 96 piston head. Okay, so first of all, for those of you who don't know what a piston does, basically a piston will sit in a cylinder just like this, like so, and as it is moving, you pull the bolt back and it goes back with the bolt and it catches on the trigger, and when you push the bolt back it brings the air into the cylinder. When you release the trigger, this slams forward, compressing the air and shoving the BB out the barrel through this little piece called the nozzle. So all of these pistons have actually been tested. Every single one of them has run through a gun at some point. This one obviously is quite junk. It's a stock piston. It will break very quickly. Although it's not usually the first thing that will break. Usually the first thing that will break in a build or a stock build is the trigger. This SHS piston was tested for a little while and some problems were noticed with it. The Action Army piston I actually had in my personal gun for quite a while. Not a huge fan of it. Next one is the Modify one, which was in a rental gun of mine that a high tier one that I put in there for a little while, and it ran right around 500 FPS with the build. It was a Modify M150. And this one I just put into my personal gun, switched it out with the Action Army one, and I got some pretty strange results. So first of all, just to clarify something, this one as well as the SHS and the stock one have a smaller inner diameter. They're meant for 7mm springs, whereas the Modify one as well as the Garter are wider. They're meant for 9mm springs. Whoops. Now, originally, I didn't like that idea because of something called Joule creep, which we will get to later. I like the 7mm because they're typically a little bit heavier. Actually, in this case, that wasn't entirely true with the Action Army one. That one was actually one of the lighter ones. The SHS one was the heaviest piston of them all. But, so first of all, let's just go in order. Or, sorry, we already went through that one. This one. After running for a little while, it noticed, or actually I didn't even really get to run it for very long before I noticed that the bolt wouldn't catch all the time. So after filing down the end of it, it ended up working quite a bit better. So what was happening was the piston tail was a little too long, so the trigger the trigger couldn't catch it. So that one kind of had some required modification to work. This one, it works, but this O-ring on the top does have a habit of falling off. I ended up super gluing mine in so it shouldn't fall off again. It does have two nice Teflon rings, stainless steel tail, unlike the SHS one. I did end up boring this a little bit wider, so it might look a little bit funny, but I had some random, I don't even remember what brand, spring guide, but the bearing was just a little bit too wide, so I had to bore this just a little wider. Whereas both the stock and the SHS one would have fit over it, this one didn't. It was a little bit tighter. Now this one, you'll notice that it is very open. There's not a lot to it. The porting on the side is massive, and as you can tell, it already kind of bent a little bit, probably from running the high strength spring. These are clearly not very durable pistons. Not meant for super strength springs or anything like that. It does get very, very good compression, as you'll notice the piston head difference between the Garter and Modify versus the other three. These ones use O-rings, whereas these use the piston cup style. Now what that does is, instead of putting force, like in this one, the air going into the top and spreading the O-ring, this one, the force is coming from behind the piston that's pushing the air. So in reality, this is getting better compression than the other ones, if that makes any sense. I'm not great at explaining how that works exactly, but so instead of pushing to instead of the O-ring spreading to the side, this is actually coming from behind, if that makes any sense. It's a little bit easier to show. This next one is almost identical to the Modify in every way, minus one pretty crucial fact, is that the porting is significantly smaller. Now what that does is it makes it heavier, as well as makes it easier to weigh up, or increase the weight of it for Joule creep, as well as the fact that it is more durable. So what happened was, I had the Action Army in my gun, which takes 7mm. I had the Action Army M150 in it, as well as the spring guide that I told you was weird. And it was shooting right around 550 FPS with .2s, so it was like 380 with 4.5s. Joule was right around 2.8. So when I switched to this one, I had to switch the spring and spring guide because they go from 7mm to 9mm. So what happened was I bought the Garter M150 because I figured it should be right around the same as this one. I didn't want to increase FPS at all. What happened was when I threw all of the parts in and I shot it, I just shot straight into the woods for the first shot just to see how it flew, and it flew beautifully, straight as an arrow as far as I could see. I didn't have the scope on the gun at the time, and it was shooting very, very fast, so I was a little bit concerned. So I put the chronograph to it, and it was shooting 440 with .45s. Now for those of you unfamiliar with the Joule ratio, that is 4.2 joules. That is insanely high. No field that I've ever heard of would ever allow that, and honestly I wouldn't want to play with that because that's just mean. That's just cruel, really. So I'm currently in the process of changing out the spring, since I don't have any other 9mm springs sitting around other than the ones that I used in both the Modify and the Garter one. So I'm flipping the springs because this was a Modify spring, so I'm putting that with the Garter, and I want to see what happens if the FPS came from the spring or from the piston. I'm guessing the spring, because the spring pull was a little bit harder than the Modify one, but it shouldn't have made that big of a difference. So onto the weight and the Joule creep. So for those of you unfamiliar with Joule creep, what that means is that it's basically trying to find the optimal BB weight. So with my gun, let's just say, for instance, this build with the Garter piston, it was running 620 FPS with .2s. Now that's actually 3.6 joules. So the Joule rating was actually significantly lower than the Joule rating with the .45s. So what happens is, as you increase BB weight, the gun runs more efficiently. In certain cases, the AEGs don't run as efficient in heavier weights in some cases. If you build them right, they will. But the snipers are meant for the heavy weights. So because I actually have a shortened barrel as well, because of that, the cylinder to barrel ratio, the Joule creep was much, much better for the .45s, which that gave it 4.2 joules versus 3.6. That's a massive Joule creep. So the weight will help with that as well. What happens is, with a lighter one, like this one weighing in at 36 grams, what happens is the piston, because there's less resistance because of the weight, it will move faster through the cylinder, and the air will be pushed out of the cylinder faster. Now that may sound like it will give you more FPS, but it will actually push the air around the BB a little bit more than it should. And with the heavyweight BBs, they move slower. So you don't want the BB to go around, you want it to go behind. So that's what you want the weight for. Alright, so now just in line of the weights. This one, weighing in at 38 grams, is by far the lightest. The next one, the SHS piston, is actually, believe it or not, the heaviest. This one weighed in at 70 grams. Many people will increase the weight of their pistons to 70. This one's already there. The Action Army one, this one weighed in at 48 grams, actually the second lightest piston, right behind the stock one. Very, very light. You can see all the porting in it and the holes. I like the way they did the porting much better than the way they did the Modify one. Instead of just, dragging a mill straight down there and just blasting out half the material. They actually gave it some structure. Some people call it Swiss cheesing, which actually that's pretty accurate, really. The next one, the modify piston. Without the piston head, weighed in at 48 grams. The piston head was 8 grams. Actually, that was the same between the two. They were both 8 grams. The Garter piston, without the piston head, was 56. So, in total, the two of them, modify piston head and piston, weighed in at 56 grams. Garter, 64. So, the Garter is the second heaviest piston, which is nice. And unlike the modify one, because it is so hollow, here, hold on, let me explain this. So what happens is when you insert the spring, typically people will weigh up their pistons with wire or something. They'll wrap it around the piston. But as you can see, if you wrap it around, it'll interfere very heavily with the spring. You do not want that. Whereas with the Garter piston, you could increase the weight if you wanted to, because you cannot interfere with the spring, because the porting on it is significantly lower, or significantly less than the porting on the modify. I mean, you can clearly see modify is longer and way wider. So out of all of these, I really wish I actually had a chance to get more pistons here, because I wanted the Lilacs one, which you might not be familiar with because it has been discontinued, but I really should have bought it when I had the chance. I kept looking at it and saying, I'll buy it another time, and then, discontinued. So I really wish I had the chance to get it because it looks identical to this one. I mean, in every way. The color, everything. Same. Only difference was the piston head, as you can see here, was orange. I do have the Lilacs piston head. So I'm quite impressed with Garter. This one looks identical. It seems to perform very well. And it gets amazing compression. What happened was when I had the spring in there and I inserted it into the cylinder, I pushed it down. And when it went to go back up, because of the way the piston cup expands, it actually stopped itself at the threads because it was expanding that good in tolerance that it actually went into the threads and stopped. Now I was a little bit concerned at first because I was looking at it and I'm like, okay, is it too wide, or did it just get stuck in the cylinder? So I pushed it down and it came back up and stopped at the threads. So it moves fine in the cylinder, just it stops at the threads. And actually the Teflon ring is so good in tolerance that it also struggles to get past the threads. Once it's past though, it's fine. It's just, you got to kind of wiggle it around until you get it in there. Once it's in there, it moves beautifully. It's just perfect tolerance. This is the Action Army cylinder, by the way. Everything about this piston is my favorite, between it being heavier than the SHS piston, but with the piston cup style, it gives you much better compression. Stainless steel tail, you don't have to worry about it breaking. Teflon ring, less porting than the Modify. It's just all around a great piston. And surprisingly enough, it's actually one of the cheapest ones here. Probably this one would be cheaper. I don't even... No, actually, SHS is kind of... for those of you who don't know, SHS has basically been discontinued entirely. So those are almost impossible to find. When you could find them, they came in a kit for $30. You got the piston, the spring, and the spring guide. The spring guide was aluminum. Not the greatest spring guide in the world, because all spring guides that are aluminum are kind of crappy. Action Army one, I believe, runs... Oh, I gotta remember. It's like 45, I believe, or 35, something like that. So the Action Army piston is more expensive than the entire kit for SHS, but that's to be expected. I mean, this piston is significantly nicer than the SHS one. This one, I believe, runs for between the piston head, the Modify piston head, and the piston, I believe, runs total of 40 or 45, a little bit more than the Action Army. Whereas this one, gosh, I'm trying to remember what these all go for. I think this one goes for 30 with just the piston head's another like 5, so it'd be like 35. So in reality, these three are all right around the same price, but this one I believe is a little bit cheaper, and by far my favorite. The quality on this thing is just very nice. For those of you who aren't familiar with Garter, they make very nice parts. And on top of that, you can see the height difference well, first of all, actually the modify and the Garter are the same height, whereas the Action Army, if you compare, here I'll move it a little closer, Action Army is a little taller. I'll explain this in a minute. This one's a little, wow, I keep dropping these things. The SHS is a little bit shorter, and the stock one's about the same as the SHS, a little bit taller actually. See, what happens is the length of the piston, oh hey, look at that, it's just a little tiny bit shorter than the modified, but not by much. See, the length of the piston will actually increase or decrease your cylinder volume marginally. When I say marginally, I mean it's just ever so slight difference, and it probably really doesn't make much of a difference, but I like to push for the absolute most. So the shorter it is, the more cylinder volume you'll have technically, although the only difference is that the Action Army one does have an open area in the center, so that will increase the volume a little bit more. So in reality, these are probably right around the same, because this one is longer, but it does have the hole. But I mean, it's going to be so close you're not even going to notice a difference in cylinder volume. But the Action Army is the tallest there. It's kind of weird. But yeah, I'm actually I'll actually do another video just to review what happens when I switch out the spring, because this was the rental. It had a Lilacs cylinder, which actually I liked the Action Army cylinder better than the Lilacs, just because of the way the bolt handle was set up. There was more strength in the Action Army one. It was a lot more solid. That's why it's in my gun. So once I switch out the springs, I will do another video and show you what the heck happens. I mean, I'm really curious. I want to see. I really don't want to be shooting people with 4 joules, that's for sure. If it doesn't work, or if it's still getting the same kind of FPS, I'll be getting a much weaker spring, for sure. So yeah, thanks for watching, and for sure remember to use the Garter piston. Thank you. Bye now. Took me a couple minutes. I decided I'm probably just going to add this into the other video I just made. So I just switched out the Garter spring with the modify spring. Kept the same system. Everything was the exact same except for the spring. So hopefully with 0.2s it should drop. Hopefully. It was running 620 FPS. I'm hoping it'll go down to like 550, but we're about to find out. Sorry, trying to get the camera set up in a way that you guys can watch. Okay. So this is a mag with 0.2s in it. I don't remember if I cocked it yet or not. Oh, I did. Alright. So now there should be 1 BB in the chamber. Get this all out of the way. Same chronograph I used. Bags so the BB doesn't go flying all around the place in here. Where did I put that? I believe this will work. Should be better than the last bag. The last bag actually broke with the super high strength build that I was just 518. So more than likely it was actually, that is higher than the spring was with the modified piston in the other build. And technically the other build should have been a higher FPS because it's a longer barrel. So yeah, I guess the piston is just better in every way. Okay, I really hope I didn't get this mixed up, but I think this is the .45 mag. Or I guess we'll see by FPS. Oh, here, in case you wanted proof, 518.9. That runs at 2.5 joules. Alright, not terrible. Alright, setting the chronograph to 0.45s, and fire into it. Hopefully I didn't mix up the mags. Okay, now we're all good. Aha, right where I wanted to be. Actually, it's a little higher than I wanted to be. 367, 2.83 joules. I was hoping to get 360, but maybe the spring will wear in a little more over time, but I think the piston's just giving it more FPS than the previous Action Army one. So, that's actually, I probably could use that for, my field has a little higher, different limits actually. I'd probably be getting 100-foot minimum engagement with this. That's not a problem for me. I'm always shooting over that anyways. So yeah, I guess don't trust Garter's springs, because M150s should not be shooting 4.2 joules. I mean, that's absurd. I don't know what I'm going to do with this spring now. Should make a new build and just shoot like those steel BBs out of it for hunting squirrels or something like that. My brother hunts, so he might want it. I don't hunt personally, but that'd be kind of funny. So yeah, I'm going to finish putting this gun back together and sight it in and everything and go shoot some people, right? For all the people who don't understand, this is Airsoft. We're shooting pellet guns, basically. We're not trying to kill people. I'm making this video longer. So I actually took the cylinder head off, and as you can see, as what I was explaining earlier, the Garter cylinder, or the piston head, will just stop at the threads, which makes it really nice to install the cylinder head without having to worry about it going through your hand. So what I'm about to do here is actually switch the cylinder head. You see, I have on the left the original Action Army cylinder head that came with the cylinder. On the right, I have the Modify cylinder head. A little bit different. The threads, as you can see, are a little shorter. But one of the crucial differences is this one has a pad, so it should dampen the sound a little bit, as well as a taper, but that's not a big deal. It does look to be ever so slightly longer with the nozzle, so that may even give it more FPS, unless it's just too long. But we're about to find out, because I'm going to put it in and see it. So it was shooting 367 FPS before. Should stay right around the same. I am a little bit worried because as I lined it up here, it does seem to be a little bit longer, so we'll actually decrease cylinder volume slightly, so I'm a little concerned about that. I like my cylinder volume. Alright, so now it's together. I believe this is .2s. Maybe we'll see a very clear FPS difference in the two of them. If it's not. So same setup as before. The leather bag and everything. Change the chrono to .2. Oh. That was definitely not .2s, because it just pierced a hole right through my bag. Well, that's annoying. 365 FPS, so it actually decreased. Hold on, I gotta change the. Alright, so 2.8 joules, so that's actually right where I wanted to be. How do I mix these up? Yeah, whatever. Okay, so now these are most likely .2s, unless I mix it up again. Change the photograph again. Why is it breaking my bag? Again! I need a different bag, like a metal bag. Alright, 515 FPS. That's 2.4 joules. So it did drop the joules and the FPS a little bit by changing the cylinder head. I'm guessing because it's stopping it sooner, as well as the fact that the cylinder volume is slightly lower. I don't know what I'm going to do, honestly. I may actually machine this one out, because, sorry. You can see from on the Modify one that they actually just kind of machined this down, the non-threaded part. They pour it down a little bit and then put a pad in. So I may just do that to this one, so it doesn't decrease the cylinder volume as much. I don't know, or maybe I'll cut the other one a little shorter or something. I don't know what I'm going to do. Decisions. Whatever. I'll make a decision and then I'll do another video. Hopefully I'll actually separate this next video from this one. Forgot to say, thank you for watching. This is Eric Donato with Darkfire Airsoft. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and if you need any questions, or if you have any questions or need any upgrades or anything like that, feel free to contact us, as we do all sorts of stuff, and I am more than happy to give suggestions or anything like that. So yeah, have a great day.